Hello, my name's Dean Lloyd and welcome to Just Conversations, where we have a conversation and questions with people who have expertise and influence in the world of criminal justice. I'm excited to say today we've got Dana Kaplan, who is, I'll let her introduce herself and give herself a title, but yeah, we'll be questioning Dana today and just having a conversation. So thank you for joining us, Dana.
Thank you for having me, Dean. As Dean said, I'm Dana Kaplan, and I am based out of New York City. For 8 years, I worked for the New York City Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, and I'm currently a senior advisor to the Independent Commission on New York City Incarceration and Criminal Justice Reform, which is working on the closure of New York City's Rikers Island Jail. And I'm with the National Institute of Criminal Justice Reform as well.
So essentially, you've just answered my first question. It was, what is your experience in the world of criminal justice? Even if you just want to elaborate just around some experiences or stories that stick out.
Sure. So for the last 8 years, I was at the New York City Mayor's Office of Criminal Justice, and we were working on and focused on the closure of Rikers Island, which is a brutal penal colony, essentially. It's located on an island off of New York City. We were focused on both the closure of the jail as well as reducing the number of people who are incarcerated in New York City on a given day. And so we were focused on things like expanding alternatives to incarceration, transitional housing, reentry programs, pretrial diversion, everything that would impact the jail population. I've also spent a great deal of time on young adult justice and juvenile justice, both at the mayor's office, so working on school climate reform, and trying to implement restorative justice practices in the school and arrest diversion programs, working to get the 16 and 17-year-olds off of Rikers Island and raise the age so that 16 and 17-year-olds were treated like children under New York City law. And before the mayor's office, I spent about 7 years running a nonprofit organization in New Orleans, Louisiana, that monitored conditions in the youth prisons in Louisiana and worked on legislative reform. So trying to end the practice of sentencing children to life without parole, which is quite a big practice historically in the United States. So I've been working on this for a while in a range of different ways.
So now you understand why I'm so happy to have Dana as a guest, because she's doing a lot of big work and great work that's necessary in her space. So what would you see as innovative practices in the area of criminal justice that you're working now?
So I'm working on 2 projects right now. One is to support the New York City's commitment to actually close the jails on Rikers Island and reduce the jail population. It is a hard project to implement. There is a tremendous amount of support for it, but there's also, continued opposition, and really, I'd say people who are kind of stuck in an old way of doing things in the US. But I'm also working on a project nationally, which is working with states and counties around the country who are interested in closing youth correctional facilities and reallocating the savings from the facility closures into community-based programs and figuring out transition plans for those facilities. So transition plans for staff that are working in the facilities, transition plans to address what the neighborhood impact would be of closures, but also to figure out what they could be repurposed as to be real community assets. And I think that, I'd say that all of that work is, an exciting moment right now that we really see a lot of different government actors, heeding the call from a lot of community folks to say that, this kind of mass expansion of prisons and jails that we did in the United States over the last 30 years wasn't actually beneficial. And so, I think what's innovative and exciting and new is that we're, hopefully in a little bit of a crossroads in which, we can actually say, how do we close some of these facilities? It's been incredibly costly for the US to spend this much money on prisons and jails. So how can we take that funding and actually invest it in neighborhoods and communities and, real public safety solutions? And then, what can we do with those closed correctional facilities that is better for the neighborhoods and, for society than using them as prisons and jails? So I'm
Yeah,
excited about changing the trajectory in the US on this.
yeah, and what I take away from that is the innovation is the closure and the wanting to close the prisons, which is a totally different approach to you have or have had in the States. And there appears to be, or sounds like there might be some appetite for that. So yeah, that's definitely big work and important work to get everybody on board.
Mm-hmm.
And get everybody, I like to say, to get everybody in the same boat, facing in the same direction and rowing in the same direction.
Yeah, exactly. And you're right, that is the innovation, because that is different than how it has historically been done in the United States. We've seen some progress over the last several years. Like, there are absolutely, facilities that have closed and been repurposed. So we have closed correctional facilities in the US and, some in New York that have become affordable housing, movie sets. One of them is, I think, growing marijuana now that it's more legalized in the
What a
state.
transition.
There's one that has become a distillery. So there's been a real, that we do have some positive examples
Yep.
of where there are closed correctional facilities. But yes, it is an innovation that there is more and more appetite to do that. Now, I'll say on the flip side, of course, when there's upticks in crime, you have, people kind of saying the same old tropes of, oh, we need to not reduce the number of people in jail and prison in the US, and, kind of pushing back against this trend. But I think overall, there's just a lot more research and evidence about the fact that, our incarceration policies have had pretty horrific impacts on, both people who are incarcerated and, and their communities. And that the data around whether incarceration itself works is pretty questionable.
Yeah, it's interesting, that one. I often say to people is, in our attempt to punish one, we harm many. So like the one person goes to jail, but they've got family members and the onflow into the community around whether there is an overall net benefit. It's interesting to work out how you would extract that data as well. Yeah. So third question is, do you believe it is the responsibility of prison or community corrections to reduce recidivism? And why would you believe either way?
I'd say that anything that we are doing in the criminal justice system, or as many people in the US call it now, the criminal legal system, should have the intention of reducing recidivism. And if it is not reducing recidivism, then the question is, for what purpose? So if, I think that obviously we need to be evaluating neighborhood-based programs and community-based programs like alternatives to incarceration for what their impact is on recidivism. We absolutely need to be evaluating corrections for what its impact is on recidivism. But, the need for a criminal legal system to have an intervention that actually can reduce a person's likelihood of becoming involved in criminal activity or becoming, coming back into contact with the justice system is essential. So again, if the purpose isn't to improve public safety by reducing recidivism, what is it? Is it just, for punitive purposes? Which, and obviously philosophically, there's many that think that, that a punitive purpose is appropriate. I think accountability is one thing, and I think a lot of people support accountability as a concept. But fundamental to how we evaluate the effect and the effectiveness of anything in the criminal legal system, including corrections or community corrections, should be, if someone is in this program or in this facility or or comes into contact with this intervention, are they more likely to succeed afterwards or not?
Yeah, I think that's a really valid point around like what are we trying to achieve here? Like, fair enough, there's certain individuals that have participated in certain crimes, serious, indictable offences. However, my experience has been the vast majority of people in prison are there for minor offences. So yeah, ensuring that they leave in a better situation than when they got there. That would be sort of what I would see as a good result. Question without notice. Are you aware of the current recidivism rates and how you measure them? Like, I know that in Australia, we measure them about 2 years out, sort of, and where that stands, that's sort of the standard of what they're trying to achieve.
Yeah, the recidivism rates that I'm familiar with are, probably a couple years old at this point. I want to say, I want to say something like, I don't want to give a stat that's wrong. But
exactly, I respect that.
I will certainly say that when we looked at what the effect was at Rikers historically, we absolutely, we're seeing a very high recidivism rate. So, this is kind of going back years. There's been a lot of efforts to fund different reentry programs and better supports for people leaving Rikers. And I do believe that some of those have had some impact and success. That has more to do, I would say, with the programming that people are getting access to after they leave Rikers than about their time on Rikers Island itself, because people will definitely speak to the trauma of being on Rikers Island in New York City and, just the level of violence that they experience or witness, or just, basic things like medical neglect that, is really challenging. Those have all, I'd say, and, this is both anecdotal of people who are reporting on, their time going through our local jail system incarceration, has been really negative. But historically, it has also had a really horrific recidivism rate.
Yeah, understood. So the fourth question is, how does the work you are currently involved with support people to exit the criminal justice system?
So a lot of the work that I'm currently involved with is about, orienting us on how we can fund programs at the neighborhood and community level that either are going to better support people who are coming out of incarceration or release, or better support and divert people, before they ever get to that point. Some of the examples, a big thing that we're trying to, promote and see additional investments in New York City around is supportive housing. There was, just to give a little bit of context, there's just over, I think 5,000, or now it's close to 6,000 people in Rikers Island on a given day. An organization called the Corporation for Supportive Housing did a study and found that in 1 year at Rikers Island, over 2,000, so I think over 2,500 individuals lacked housing and required access to supportive housing. So, and we talk to judges, and judges say, if someone comes before them and they know that if they release them from the court and they don't have a stable home to go to, they are more likely to view them as a flight risk or, have implications for public safety. And so they'll be more likely to detain someone who lacks housing. And so, one of I would say there's a couple big drivers of our, of our jail population. And one is just this lack of supportive housing in New York City as a whole. The other is effective community-based mental health services.
Yeah.
So, there's a huge percentage of people on Rikers. I think about 50% have some type of mental health, concern, and it's about 20% that have severe mental health issue. And so, it's really a failure of the types of programs and services that we have available at the community level that, unfortunately lead just way too many people to, end up at Rikers. And our Commissioner of Corrections will say that himself, that, a lot of the people that kind of come in through the door of Rikers are not, those that necessarily should be there. If there was another mental health program that they could be diverted to instead. And so those are a couple of the huge drivers that we're really focused on.
It's that really seems to be a universal problem from who I've spoken to, and especially in Australia, where we're in the middle of a housing crisis. And in Australia, you can't get bail without having an address. So it's impossible. The judge isn't allowed to release you if you don't have an address to go to. So and then the overrepresentation of people with mental health and mental illness and all of those sorts of there isn't other services which would be more suitable for those people, which is a real struggle.
Sounds like Australia and the US have a lot of things in common on this front.
Yes. So is there dedicated beds for when people are released? Like, do you have boarding house? We have boarding houses here that aren't really monitored or anything like that. And there's sort of a sad reality of like, I've got nothing and nowhere to go.
We have some transitional housing beds in the city. So there's always been some transitional housing beds. Now the capacity has not met the need historically. So when I was at the mayor's office, we funded about 1,000 additional transitional housing beds, and those beds are in the process of coming online, of being opened. Frankly, I think a real challenge is that there's such a crisis of affordable housing generally, especially in New York City, that, even if people have that transition, the transitional housing beds can come to capacity pretty quickly because there's not really places for people to go. And there's also, real barriers and discrimination for people who are coming out with criminal records in terms of housing placements. Now, in the height of COVID, when we were really working to, and, in New York City was really working to release a lot of people from jails and prisons, the city opened a number of different reentry hotels, which were hotels that, were serving, that anyone who was coming out of a prison or jail and needed somewhere to go would be able to go and get a bed at one of these, what ended up being about 800 beds of different hotel beds spread out throughout the city, that had case managers, 24/7 on site, clinical services on site, programming offered on site. It was beds, but it was really, staffed by nonprofit providers, had a lot of kind of peer navigators. So some of those hotel beds have shut down as COVID has entered a different trend, phase. I know that there's people who are fighting to maintain at least some aspects of that model, because I would say it was one of the silver linings of the COVID pandemic, is that we actually, opened these hotels that had a level of services and supports that were, far better for people coming out of incarceration. Because historically what has happened is if someone is released from Rikers Island at 3 a.m, 1 a.m, they're given like bus fare and their bag of clothes. There's, Rikers Island, there's no subway that goes to Rikers Island. So people would be released, have to take a bus, and then just go to our Department of Homeless Services shelter intake. So we've had a really horrible system of supports historically for people who come out or released and, don't have somewhere to go. And hopefully we're in the process now of, changing that.
That just seems, I don't understand why anyone would be released at 1 o'clock in the morning. Like, I just don't understand that concept of, if you're trying to spit people out better, why they're getting out at 1 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning. I understand systemically, or it fits well in the punitive model, which I see as, the punitive model is, like, how can we get you back as quick as possible? But yeah, it's, how long were the beds available for? So did they get access to it? Like, so people were released into the hotel beds. Was it a week? Was it 2 weeks, or is it ongoing?
Oh, people have stayed there for months at a time. So there are, case managers and housing specialists on site that have been working to get people into more permanent placements. And so, that more permanent placement might be a longer term transitional housing bed. It might be, someone who is able to reconnect, establish, contact with a family member and, move in with them, but needed just, some time to do so. We also have been working to get people access to housing vouchers, which are vouchers that, some which are federally funded to allow people to, rent apartments or, rent their own private housing, but, in a subsidized way. So there's kind of quite an application process for those. Yeah. So it's hard to, that's the type of thing that you're not able to make that happen from Rikers Island. But, when you are in the reentry hotels and there's housing specialists on staff, people have been able to get access to those and, develop other plans. So again, just speaking frankly, we still have an affordable housing crisis in New York City. And so there is just like this limit of what the stock is overall still. But no one has been, kind of forced to leave the hotels until another alternative was found for them.
Yeah, cool. So where and what do you hope to have achieved in 5 years' time? What's one sort of goal that you would have hoped to have achieved in 5 years' time in this space?
Oh, in 5 years' time, I want to see Rikers Island closed. I want to see, thousands fewer people in jail on a given day in New York City. I think that is absolutely possible. Our lengths of stay in jail are very long. We still don't have, community programs. Like, I think if we had those mental health programs, we had supportive housing, and we had faster lengths of stay and, kind of a more efficient court processing system, you would literally see thousands fewer people in jail on a given day in New York City. So that is something I want to see. And I don't think that we can keep on talking about how great we are as a city in this world if we can't figure that, that out. Yes. So, if we spent as much time on, like, if we had the same level of attention and urgency paid to that as, to so many other things in this city, we would all be better off. But, and I want to see, I'd like to see, especially since I'm working with some other states around the country right now that are looking to close youth correctional facilities. I'd also like to see, some more youth correctional facilities closed, but equally important is seeing the savings from those closures being directed into real neighborhood-based community programs. We have really, in the last several decades in this country, spent billions of dollars on the carceral side of our public safety system, billions of dollars in operating prisons and jails, both spending them and their operations. And we have kind of starved the types of social safety net programs that, are actually more effective at reducing crime and addressing public safety. So, I want to see that pendulum shift from, the facilities closing to actually funding and supporting programs that work at the neighborhood level. And we have a really rich infrastructure of nonprofit providers, of community programs, vibrant neighborhoods. It is just about making a decision to fund and support those.
Yeah, I think that's, for me, and what I've sort of seen and have learned over time, I think that's where the real change will happen, is in when the capacity of those communities is increased to be able to have people back and welcome people back and allow them to participate in those communities. That's where I believe we'll start to see changes in people going back to prison, because they won't have that need to be criminal or act criminal, behave in, or have criminogenic needs, if you will. Yeah. So I really want to say it's been an absolute pleasure meeting you and interviewing you. I first heard you talk at the International Criminal Justice Conference, and I was highly impressed. And then you have been kind enough to give me your time again. So I'd just like to say thank you for that, and good luck in your work. And I wish you all the best for your journey.
Thank you so much. I look forward to seeing where this goes, and it's been a pleasure to know you as well.